What's the price of freedom, and is it ever too high? Are there dangers so great that the mere concept of opposition is unthinkable? These were questions answered by our nation's greatest generation. My papu was one of them. Papu is Greek for grandpa, and I was named after him. I found his World War II journals filled with stories of tents in the jungle and storms at sea. My papu was gone, but I knew there were others with similar stories out there, so I set out on a journey, and I found 11.
I was born in 1918, March the 8th, Wadsworth, Illinois.
William Earl Corley, Montgomery County, Texas.
Kermit is very simple because Mrs. Teddy Roosevelt's mother's maiden name is Kermit, and they had a son named Kermit. That's how my father admired Teddy Roosevelt. I became Kermit.
Robert Flath, born in Superior, Wisconsin, until I was 7 years old, and we took a train from Minneapolis to Stanley, North Dakota.
When I was a kid, I rode out to the airport one day, just by myself, and what comes in there but a tri-motor Ford airplane. This guy came in, the pilot came in, and he wanted to take the plane and fly some demonstrator flights or whatever, advertising flights. I went over and I asked him if I could go with them when they took this flight. And the guy said, well, he said, yeah, but he says, you got any money? I said, yeah, I got 35 cents. He gave me the 35 cents and took me on the flight. and when I went home and my mother was in the backyard, I said, did you see that big plane come in here? She said, yeah. And I told her, I said, I was on it. She said, what? I said, I was on it. She said, you wait till your father comes home.
I had always dreamed when I was little, reading funny papers about planes taking off and landing on carriers. And I thought, how can they do that? A plane that flies that fast, how can they slow down enough to land? Or how can they take off? So much I don't know.
I'd always been interested in flying. I played around with little model airplanes, and some that had them, the engine was a rubber band.
December 7th, 1941, I was walking down the street in Pensacola, Florida, going by a barracks that housed British trainees.
December 7th, I was delivering newspapers up in Roseburg, Oregon. I heard it. Oh, the war happened.
We were supposed to be on 12 months active duty training. But then the war got started and we were extended, they were all reserves, extended for the duration of the Navy.
I had a part-time job in a gas station, and my first customer came in that morning and said, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And knowing damn little about world geography, I guess, my answer was, where the hell's Pearl Harbor?
What made me join the Navy was the very fact that our country was at war, but I was young. I was too young to go, and I was in high school, and so there's no way I could get out of going to finish my education. And so I didn't join until I was 17 years old, and then I joined after I graduated from high school.
My dad was responsible for that mainly. He was in World War I. He said, I spent a lot of time in foxholes that were half full of water. He said, think about where you'd like to sleep every night. It might have a bearing on where you go in the service.
I was going to be drafted. And my father had been in World War I in the infantry, and I had heard stories from him, and I decided I didn't want any part of that.
I was in my senior year at University of Illinois, and all of a sudden I heard this noise, and here it was, a Navy fighter plane doing acrobatics over the campus. It got me excited, and I inquired about it, and the man said, well, it's the best flight training in the world.
Well, we sang it to razz Air Force guys that were razzing us. And so we would sing their song. Off we go into the wild blue yonder, crash.
I thought I wanted to fly Air Force. And we got to the Air Force recruiting station on Market Street, and they couldn't take us at the time. It was a mental exam or a physical that we had to wait for, and we had the draft breathing down our neck. So another party with me decided, let's talk about this. So we stepped out the door and looked to our left, and here's a big flag flying over this ferry building, Fly Navy. Well, we were in the Navy before the day was over. Best move I ever made.
I was supposed to go to Torpedo Squadron 11. I was supposed to work in the office. A couple of weeks went by, and this guy, they were going to Monterey Bay, and they were going down there to have water-filled drops, glide bombing drops. So he said he would let me fly with him down there. Well, I was in seventh heaven. I thought this is the greatest thing in the world. I'll never forget it. So then when they got done training that day, and he flew back to San Francisco, naturally, he said, when he was going back, he says, you want to fly the plane? He's telling me on the mic, right? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, just keep it level, you know. I took it almost all the way back to San Francisco. Then he took it in and went down, landed at Alameda and all. Well, I thought that was great. That made me really want to fly.
In boot camp, our section leader said that some ordnance men fly, some mechanics, aviation mechanics fly, all aviation radiomen fly. And I thought, oh yeah. I didn't have a chance to finish high school, so I couldn't qualify for pilot training. But I still wanted to fly, but I never thought I'd have a chance. And here this guy is telling me that I might have a chance tomorrow. I thought, what is happening? So sure enough, tomorrow we went over to the auditorium, and he said, I'm going to send you a couple of different sounds, and I want you to tell me what they sound like to you. A long dash and a short dot. He said, that's the two components you use in Morse code. I thought, that's so simple, I don't know the answer. I was thinking it'd be tougher than that. So I wrote down a dash and a dot. The next day, our section leader was reading off the names for those who were going to school. He named a couple and then called Bloomquist, and like a dummy, I just stood there like I was frozen. I thought, how can this happen to me? Here I'm going to have a chance to fly, and I don't even have an education. How could this happen?
It was the Yellow Peril. The instructor was in the back seat, and you were right in front of him in the front seat.
That was my first airplane. That was interesting. And I'm still here.
We finished up at Kingsville, advanced, were commissioned ensigns, and were sent to Opelika, Florida, where they had a few of the Brewster Buffaloes. Now these were antiques. If the lever to lower the wheels didn't work, there was a pair of pliers in the map compartment. You grab that pair of pliers and reach down underneath the dashboard somewhere, cut a wire, and the wheels would drop. That's how we got that darn thing on the ground.
Well, my first carrier landing was in Lake Michigan. There were two ships that traveled on Lake Erie from Detroit to Buffalo and Detroit to Cleveland. And they put flight decks on them.
That Admiral Kincaid come up with the Sable and the Wolverine.
It was in the Great Lakes where they had practice carriers, and I qualified out of Chicago there with, I think it was 6 carrier landings, and they told me I was qualified.
Well, that K-20 camera was a big surprise one day, and I picked that up, and I thought, how do I hold on to it? And then I saw the handle, and I thought, oh, you grab that. Well, where's the button that you take the picture with? So I looked around. I don't even know, and I'm looking at one right now, and I don't know where the button is, don't remember. It is, I remember it's heavy, but it seemed like I had it up, oh, it did, I had to have it up here for the viewfinder. There's a trigger on the handle. I don't remember doing that.
We could take an airplane within a 300-mile radius on our day off. I grew up out in the country out here, an area called Freshwater. When I come in here, they knew young Coeur was home. Our big thing was what we call flat heading, you know, as near the ground as you can get, buzz a building, buzz a town, buzz this, buzz that. Well, I always like to do a loop, roll out an element on top, then split S and get back down over, that's what I do over freshwater. Back down over the rooftops, do a slow roll right on the ground, which was a no-no. I was doing things over freshwater. If the Navy could have seen what I was doing, I would have been mustered out in a hurry.
Alexa Bontemsky Zabriskie. She had a house, and we used to have time off on weekends and go up there.
We spent a lot of time at her home. She had a beautiful old-style home about halfway up Haleakala on Maui.
She was a famous authoress that had a big house up on the mountain, and they used to invite the Sundowners to come up and spend the weekend.
We'd bring 6 planes in, and the 6 guys that were already at Alexa's home were down at the airport. They came down in her big Buick. They took the 6 planes back, so the planes were never out of service very long. We took the Buick back up to the house, and we would party for a couple of days.
And she fed us all and treated us like kings. Very kind of us.
Some of the Sundowners and a very famous lady by the name of Alexis Bontemsky Zabriskie helped them to come up with the logo.
I can remember them sitting around a table working on a patch, F4Fs, sinking the rising sun.
The squadron patch was the flying horse, and the inscription there was "First to attack." That was Greek. That's probably it. Yeah.
We called it Little Butch that I knew of. That's what I always heard it called. And it was the object of swooping down, laying a torpedo. And it was done by Disney Studios. I do remember that. I think it's neat, you know. I got one on my car.
Like I had nicknames. Some people had nicknames. When George would tell us, we used to call him the Greek, because George was a sun lover, and when you saw a picture of him any place else, well, you could always figure him out. We never called him George. We always referred to him as Rattle-ass. That was all. Rattle-ass this and Rattle-ass that. In fact, George sometimes gets called Rattle-ass, young George here.
Charlie. He was one of the squadron characters. We called him Skull.
Because his head looked like a skull. He was a very skinny guy, tall and skinny. He was a good flyer and a good shot, and he was our leading ace. I think he shot down 16 airplanes.
He slipped in underneath me when I didn't see him, and he fired that rocket up in front of me so that I would collapse, I guess. But it was a startling, very meaningful experience to go through. And he just laughed and laughed all the way back.
When I think about Charlie practicing aerial gunnery, I think he was just as bad as the rest of us. But when he got up against Zeros, full deflection shots, and he had him. He never missed.
My name became Tim instead of Kermit because Charlie Stimson was flying my plane, and he said, you know, Kermit doesn't come to me too well. Would you mind if I called you Tim? So from then on, it was Tim Enander, Tim, all the way through the Navy, all the way through school, everything, Tim. Tim Enander all through the Marines. It was Tim Enander all through college. It was Tim Enander while I was teaching high school. I had a service station in San Jose. It was called Tim's Richfield Service Station. And it was Tim Enander this, Tim Enander, Tim. And somebody would ask me my name, I'd say Kermit, and they'd say, what? So I'd say Tim. So that stuck with me for the rest of my life. It still does.
This is the Douglas dive bomber. It was seen as a very advanced plane, utilized a great deal in the Navy, and the first operational vehicle for the pilots. This is the bomb bay in which the main bomb was loaded. The dive flaps are perforated, they're hinged, and they open both up and down, and are designed to slow the aircraft during the dive for stability purposes. A long white and black striped, called a tail hook. It is lowered when the plane is approaching the rear of the carrier. The pilot settles on the deck and hopefully engages the tail hook and slows the plane to a stop. I have just touched the highlights, but it was a very important vehicle early in the Japanese War. My name is Robert Cox, but I'm known as Jack, and I do appreciate your concern and interest. Thank you.
By the equator, we had the King Neptune ceremony and all the fun associated with that.
They put us in a line, and they had a table, long table. One of them said, will you sample some of this? There was a mixture of tobacco and hot sauce and some other junk in it. And about that time, two guys walked up by the side of him and back of him, each of them with a sock full of sand. And this kid says, no, I don't want any of that junk. And these guys started beating on his butt. And he changed his mind and he said, yeah, I'll take a little bit. And I looked over and here's a kid sitting in an electric chair and he was just jerking. And so I thought, I can take a little juice. So when I sit down in that chair, I'm not going to look like that kid that's doing what he's doing now, just shaking. I'm going to sit there like I can't feel it. I'm going to beat them at their own game. So pretty soon it stopped and the kid got up, they were wobbling, and they pointed to me to come over, so I came over and sat down. And pretty soon they turned the juice on and I couldn't sit still. I started shaking. And there's a guy down at the end of this little lane and he had a fire hose. I put my hand up and about that time they start hitting my butt. And they say, what do you want to be? And some of the guys, the smart Alex before would say, I want to be a pollywog. And smack, they'd hit him a time or a dozen times. But if you said, I want to be a shellback like them, it wouldn't bother you. So of course I knew what I wanted to be. So I'm walking down there taking that water, about knocking me down. The guy says, "What'd you say you wanted to be?" "Shell back, shell back." Just an initiation, just a fun thing to do, but something you wouldn't want to do without being made to do it.
Wildest dream that I'd ever be sitting here telling a story that happened 74 years ago, which I thought would never be recorded. I was going to aviation machinist mate school here in Alameda. In the middle of the night, the lights went on. The master at arms said, "Everybody out, working party." And so on down the deck we went. And I looked up and I see this carrier, and I said, "What's the name of the ship?" And the guy says, "USS Neversay." And so what am I supposed to be doing? Well, from the warehouse, they brought a bunch of bombs over, and we were rolling these bombs down the deck, and then they were being hoisted aboard the ship. And we didn't know what was going to happen to these. And that was the end of the story until we hear about the Doolittle raid. And so it wasn't really important, but I may be the only living enlisted man alive today who rolled some of those 500-pound bombs down the deck that got loaded aboard the carrier that bombed Tokyo.
Well, we were supposed to go aboard the first Hornet. That was the one that Jimmy Doolittle and his B-25s flew off to raid Tokyo. And anyway, that carrier was sunk.
Well, we left the States October the 23rd, 1942. October the 26th, CV-8 Hornet was sunk by the Japanese. Here we were, a complete air group with no Hornet, no transportation.
So we were sent to Guadalcanal to fly off of Henderson Field.
Guadalcanal? Rough. It was rough.
There was no fun in Guadalcanal. Zero. It was from the sack to the line to the chow hall to the sack again. That was it.
We had a lot of mosquito bites or dysentery.
It was so near the equator there that it was hot and it was humid. It was malaria from the mosquitoes. Rats were just terrible.
As I said, here I was going to sleep in a nice ship someplace, nice quarters. I'm sleeping on an army cot with a mosquito net, finding out the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were a little tough on me because someplace along the line I ended up with a mild case of malaria.
We were moving from the Fiji Islands up to Guadalcanal. One of the pilots had diarrhea, and he must have been miserable. We let him land first. The plane was still running down the runway, and he was out of the cockpit squatting on the edge of the landing strip, relieving himself. He was able to hold it until he got to Guadalcanal, but the poor guy must have been miserable.
We flew from Fiji Islands to Guadalcanal, landed on this airstrip, and it wasn't very smooth.
Henderson Field was in process of being constructed. CBs were working on it, clearing the land, and I believe they used Marston matting to make it fairly level and usable.
We were having a bull session, just a bunch of guys talking. And that's when I first found out about George Gay. He was a lone survivor of Torpedo 8. George Gay then was in our torpedo squadron 11.
Scouting Squadron 11 was identical to Bombing Squadron 11. Both squadrons flew SBDs. Both squadrons came together as one when we were assigned to Henderson Field. Washing Machine Charlie was a Japanese plane that produced a sound similar to a washing machine, back and forth, back and forth.
Washing machine Charlie was coming, so everybody had to go to the foxhole. Well, let's see, this time was Bose Irwin. He had been sleeping with one arm under him, and somehow or other that he'd lost circulation and feeling. He went to turn over. He had a hold of the wrist with his arm that had lost feeling, and Bose thought that there was a Japanese guy who come down out of the hills, was under his cot and had a hold of his hand, and he started to holler and yell. And Marine guards came running, and the next door pilot, he came in with his .45 all cocked, ready to shoot, and Bose caused more trouble that night than Washing Machine Charlie ever did.
During the Japanese air raids, there was one after our boys slept naked in a tent. He could hear the bomb coming and it exploded close to him. He dove into the foxhole naked. It scratched him up pretty good. His belly was all scratched up. But he put his clothes on and he didn't sleep naked anymore.
Being a plane captain, you're not going to fly the airplane. You're going to start up an airplane, you warm them up, you're going to change the oil, you add the gasoline, help strap the pilot into his seat, and away he goes, and he comes back, you direct him into where he could park his airplane, refueling the aircraft, open up the wing panels, and replace the amount of shots that had been fired. Pretty much how life was.
Zero was very maneuverable, much more maneuverable than the Wildcat, but the thing about the Wildcat is it could take so much punishment, whereas the Zero, hell, you put one bullet in the Zero and it would explode. The gas tanks weren't protected.
When we escorted dive bombers and torpedo bombers into a target, the fighters would fly cover, and we had the thatch weave, that you're weaving constantly over the bombers for their protection. So you've got an airplane pointed in this direction. If somebody's coming at them, or one's coming in this direction, nobody's going straight ahead.
Gordon Cady improvised, instead of 4 planes, 2 here and 2 here, 2 planes weaving. He broke it off into 1 plane weaving. And by the time they got here, the other 2 started. We call that the Gordon Cady weave.
Now, there was a man who had thousands of hours of aviation time. He was killed landing aboard a carrier with the aircraft, a crash. It was just hard to believe that could happen to him.
Something that's never left my mind. An early morning flight would go out, start the engine, wait for the pilots to show up. They'd show up, and one morning they'd cancel their early morning flight. And in the tropics, when they canceled an early morning flight on an F4F, when the engine started to cool off, it drew moisture into the magneto, and the airplane would not start, and you'd have to remove the magneto to air the ignition system before it would start again. Leroy Childs was supposed to fly my airplane, Fox 16, and they canceled the flight. We shut the engines down, and maybe an hour later, Fox 16 would not start until Leroy Childs ended up in flying Fox 25. He was last seen drifting off to one side. He never returned. And it always kind of bothered me because had Fox 16 started, probably Leroy Childs would have still come back.
Our torpedo squadron, they suffered so badly from the flights. Air Group Commander Hamilton decided to have R&R rest and recreation for them in Australia. They tried to get back for a landing, and they crashed in the coral reef, and they all lost their lives.
I was in a 4-plane division, and my division leader came back up. I was coming this way, and he cut my tail of the plane, and that blew off, and my plane flew on its back, but then it flipped back right side and started a spiral, and I jumped off and pulled the cord, and the parachute opened. I then looked and I saw my plane going in two pieces, just going back down, but it was so cozy. I'm sitting up there about 10,000 feet coming down in a parachute with a beautiful sky and beautiful clouds and beautiful water, but pretty soon everything changed. I hit the water, tore the top off of this little package. It opened up and I crawled in it, but I couldn't do anything in that raft. It was too light and the paddles were little hand paddles. So I paddled for 3 days.
My very first strike was almost my last. Released my bomb about 3,000 feet. We were instructed to do that and start our pullout so that we wouldn't get destroyed by our own bomb blast. I had a very loud anti-aircraft shell burst. I just had a reflex action and jerked back on my control stick so hard that I passed out. I heard my rear seat gunner, Leroy, shouting, "Pull out, Mr. Strahan, pull out." So I started easing back on the stick, and when I got so I could see, the first thing I saw was palm trees. We were right down or almost on the ground. Leroy saved my life, for sure. We pulled out and then we had to fly home alone. We got back to Henderson Field and glad to be alive.
The end of the third day, there was a big, I figured 50-foot high surf. And in a matter of seconds, I was up in the top of one of those waves, and they had some coral that just was really like steel that was between me and the beach. But I went over that. I saw it when I was way up high, and I went over that and just missed it. Fella back at Guadalcanal told me to get to the end of this island, Tenerife, and then get over to the next island. There was a coast watcher and friendly natives. And he said, get there and just stay right there. There's a little hook and they'll come and get you. So I'd go inland and crawl up the side of this mountain. I was 7 days. I did that up and down.
Well, Sully, I was flying with Sully. We were by ourselves. These two Zeros were above us and attacked us. The only thing I know, he probably came after me like this. I was here, and he came down like that. I think Sully got away. I think he shot down the guy that got me, and we both survived, landed back at Guadalcanal. But the bullets exploding in the cockpit were just phenomenal noise. My God, I didn't think I'd ever heard anything so loud.
There was some big barges that had been beached on this end of the island, and I made some paddles, and I stuck them in the loops that were on the top of the raft. I had a big long pole. I'd pull it up like that and use it for a sail. And when I got over there and half swim and drag my boat coming out of the surf, there were two natives over on my right, waving at me. They took me up the island, and all of a sudden, a great big native, I said, "Are you the boss here?" And he said, "Yes." He handed me a piece of paper. He said, "You want to write a note to the Coast Watcher?" And I said, "I sure do." Pretty soon, there was a whole bunch of fighter planes, and they were planes from my squadron. They came down and saw me, and they wobbled their wings and everything. And of course, I gave them a good thumb up, and I gave them a finger too. Now I was all by myself thinking up all of these crazy things, and I'd never been crazy before, and everything worked. Everything just, it's impossible, but it worked just fine.
When we first got aboard the Hornet and left Ponam, Captain Doyle got on the intercom. He says, "I'm going to tell you what we're going to do." He says, "For security reasons, I didn't say anything in port there, but now we're out and we're on our way. We're going to join Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet. We're going to make strikes. We're going to go right up next to Japan itself at Okinawa." So that was the beginning of our adventures with the USS Hornet. Does that answer your question?
They told us, back home when you used to have hunting season, on open season you can shoot anything. And they said, "This is the southern tip of the Japanese islands. This is Ryukyu Islands, and this is open season. This is all enemies territory."
Gene Fairfax became the CO of VF-11.
When it first came to the squadron, since most of us had had a tour of duty on Guadalcanal, and here he was a seaplane pilot, and the rest of us fighter pilots just couldn't understand how could they send a seaplane pilot to be the skipper of the squadron. He had never been in fighters, and we had. Of course, it proved to be, our thoughts were absolutely stupid.
Everybody loved George Ford. He was a source of great respect. He was a very likable, capable guy. I think he bombed the battleship that they caught up with and got a Navy Cross.
Well, the Hellcat was it was the fastest thing the Navy had at that time. It was really just a joy to fly.
It was very sturdy. I have seen it come back aboard the ship, all shot to pieces and almost fell apart when it got on the deck, but it brought the pilot back.
See, we were working north of Lady Gulf. They wanted to knock out all the aircraft they could to the north. We managed to burn a few aircraft on this small island off of the southern tip of Okinawa called Aishima. And that was our first taste. And I have to tell you, when we pushed over, I couldn't keep my feet still on the rudder pedals. I was shaking all over. That's the feeling.
And when we pushed over in our dives, we went into a 70-degree dive, which is pretty darn steep, and we'd drop our bombs, and then they'd cover us. Like when we made a strike at Kahili, we could see the dust trails of the fighters taking off, the Zeros.
I sure look up to the guys that flew the planes, because that's a dangerous, and just think diving into the anti-aircraft fire and stuff. We didn't have to. I rode backwards. Everything was past us when I seen it. I didn't have to sweat the stuff coming at me. I just want the stuff going away, and that's not nearly as bad, right?
Well, a torpedo run on ships that have guns is almost suicide. You're supposed to come in at 200 feet, 200 knots, and drop at 1,000 yards out, and then pull up and it was just crazy.
So we made our run, and I'll never forget it. We get out away from the ships. We didn't know that we still had the torpedo. So when we get ready to land, they have to do an awful lot of accelerating to get the thing to go up and pick it up over the back of that ship, right? And so when that happened, guess what? The torpedo drops into bomb bay. They told him to just cut the traffic circle short and come on in. Well, he cut the traffic circle short and we made it to the ship. But baby, when we hit. I mean, that baby landed hard and that torpedo went right through the front of the plane, right through here.
The torpedo came bouncing down and everybody's running for cover, you know. I'm down on the catwalk and, you know, we're all ducked. And it's out there and it stopped and the wheel's spinning. And we had a gunnery officer named Satterley. And he went out there with his tools and took it apart and stopped it and disengaged it.
That was quite a jolt. Can you imagine if that torpedo would have went off? What would have happened to the back of that flight deck? That baby would have been out of commission for sure. And I know we would have been out of commission.
There's a lot of activity going on in the squawk boxes. And for Betty to be nosing around, it means that they weren't there to bomb. They were there to make suicide run.
My roommate, Bose Irwin, he happened to be up on the hangar deck, and he was watching, and he saw this kamikaze.
And the Betty was about the same level as the hangar deck.
We saw some tracers being fired from the Hornet.
And they hit it almost right before it got to the ship. I mean, to tell you, it's noise personified.
I'll never forget hearing those big doors. We were sealed in. There wasn't anywhere I could go. If the kamikaze bomb got that side of our ship and water started come in, they would never try to rescue us. We'd just be drowned right there. It shook me up, something terrible. It could have been the end of old Bill Strahan.
But you know, I don't think the Hornet ever got hit. I don't think it ever got hit by anything. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't get small fire hit, but it never got really hit. Torpedoes or anything like that. Unless we was the only one that torpedoed the Hornet.
We used to shoot a lot of skeet while we were at Alameda. Fighter pilots deflection shooting. So young ordnance party running the skeet range wound up, he had a litter of Boston bulls. And he thought we ought to have one. Well, he gave us this little Boston bull.
The dog, yes. Oh, yeah. He was a cute little bugger.
Well, originally it was Rabbit Moranville, Blake Moranville, commonly called Rabbit.
Blake was the youngest guy in the squadron, so he was elected to take care of Gunner. Gunner stayed with us the whole tour, and of course when Blake was shot down, that poor dog really missed Blake. And we shipped him to his dad in Guide Rock, Nebraska.
Well, let me think now. I think he was shot down over Indochina and managed to get with the Free French forces and then came back through Europe to the United States.
So that was quite a reunion when he got home and his little dog was there ahead of him.
I was at church. We had church on the It was right underneath the flight deck on the bow. And well, they shot him off the catapult, and he was banking off to the right. His controls probably froze or something, or he said it. You just got to speculate maybe he got racked up when the plane crashed, when it went in the water, because it didn't make a water landing, it crashed in the water. It went into the water by the wing and stuff. Hooper survived it. Chobal got banged up, and but LeBlanc never got out of the plane. Chobal, the guy that's a radio man, got out of the accident. Something caught his CO2 bottle when the plane evidently broke up, and he got thrown out of it and popped his CO2 bottle and made his Mae West blow up. But he used to say that what happened, what got him out was that the devil had him by the foot and the Lord had him by the hand. And he said he's glad the Lord won because all the devil got was his shoe. His shoe pulled off.
It was like the landing signal officer told us when we were practicing for night landings. He said, when you come around the 90 and get into the groove, you just look at me, and when I give you the cut signal, you tap your head and you say, God, you have it. And that was pretty much the way we landed. Hopefully it'd catch a wire. And if you missed a hook, the plane got into the barrier, got the propeller all tangled up. A lot of them were pushed down the deck towards the rear end of the ship, and it looked like a swarm of ants would get on it, pulling instruments out, pulling guns out, pulling ammunition out, anything that could be salvageable. And by the time it got to the end of the deck, everybody jumped off and they pushed the plane off the side, off the tail end.
When we came in to land, I could turn around from my seat and I could see the hook sticking out of the back end of the plane. There were 7 cables on the Hornet, and that hook usually caught one of the 7 cables. Probably half the time, just for something to do, I'd turn around and count the cables that the hook bounced over. And this one time, I'm looking at it and it bounced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I turned around because I was going for a ride. I'm in the back end of that plane, and when that tail goes up, it's going to be in a hurry. So I'm sitting there waiting to go, and nothing happened. And I look back, and the hook caught the 7th cable.
Dr. Ogus was our flight surgeon. His major in medical school was psychiatry. He had told us a few times fear wasn't anything to it. It was just a psychological thing. Well, anyway, that day, this F6F, he bounced. He hit his tail hook caught one of the last cables and just started chewing a hole right where Doc Ogus was. And Doc Ogus all of a sudden found out what fear was.
We were always concerned about water landings because sometimes our plane would sink in a minute and a half.
Once we hit the water, the plane stayed afloat 45 seconds. By that time I was out on the wingtip, just letting it go on down.
The engine failed, and so I had a dead stick landing. My rear seat gunner, Coster, he had his machine guns come up and hit him and knocked him out. Somehow or other, we got Coster out, got the rubber raft out.
And they had some destroyers in those islands, and we decided to go there. And that's when they shot me up, and hit my gas tank, and when we landed in the water, Riley and Pitcher, my crewman, got out. They got the raft out, inflated it, and I stepped into the raft and put my plotting board. I didn't even get my feet wet. But he rode backwards. He couldn't see where we were, so he was in a turret. He didn't know I could see the fleet. Row where? Come on, Charlie, just roll.
I looked up and I saw that destroyer coming, and I was sure glad to see him.
Things calmed down. The destroyer pulled up alongside the USS Hornet, and they shot a line.
When they transfer people between two ships, they send a line over and then a cable. And I went over in a mail bag. You know, I'm looking out, big, deep mail bag.
And they had to send 5 gallons of ice cream back to the rescue ship before they'd transfer us.
You know, looking back now, it was fun because of the size of the ship. I enjoyed that. We could go to different places that weren't real tight. We'd go to the hangar deck and see them working on our planes. We could walk on the flight deck when it wasn't busy. And it was a fun ship to be on, I thought.
That's where I learned to play bridge and AC-doocy. Those were the games that we played in the ready room when we weren't flying.
Played cards, drank coffee, and made jelly cinnamon sandwiches.
Blank, he was a good poker player. He made a lot of money, Blank did. So Bill and I talked about it, and we said, you know what, we ought to take that money away from him and go up to the post office and send it home to his aunt and let her put it in the bank for Blank. Because the way he drinks beer, he'll never have any money. So he was telling us about winning that money and showing it to us. And that's $1,000, we thought. Okay, maybe this is the time. That's enough to do something with when he gets out of the Navy, when this is over. So I looked at Bill, he kind of nodded his head, and so we grabbed him. And Blank is cussing us out, and we're just laughing at him because we know he's not going to fight us. So we walked over to the post office and sent the money to his aunt.
My roommate was Bo Zerwin. Bill, he says, I went to bed at night. I says, God, I don't want to be under you then. And that's just what he wanted me. He says, let's trade. So then I had to stay in the top bunk. And he was always pulling tricks on people. But when we were at mess, he'd give a quick, and you'd run your hand right into the butter or whatever it was, and makes you feel like knocking him through the wall, you know, but...
The ready room is the cool place to be. And we could take a can of beer and put it up there in the air conditioning outlet, and it would freeze up there if you didn't get it soon enough.
On board the Hornet, somebody got torpedo juice. They got that by draining the torpedoes. It was pretty stout. It was 180 proof. But that didn't last long. Too many guys wanted to sip.
But Jocko Clark, the admiral on the ship, was a teetotaler. We had to hide everything because he and the Doyle were captain of the ship, were visiting us. And so they came in and wished us well and everything else. And the captain, before he left, I'll be back. And so he got rid of the admiral, came back and had drinks with us.
Well, one of the Ulithi Atoll islands was named Mogmog. And that is where the ships pulled into the anchorage area, and we had a day to go ashore and get drunk.
Oh, yes. It was a good place to go to for supplies. They had a lot.
That was where the partying was, Mogmog Island.
That was a mess. That place really had some ships on it, man. I mean, when the whole fleet would go in there, that'd be something else.
When the ship pulled in there, they had a bar set up for us. So
And that's where the booze was all poured at Crowley's Tavern.
I had two friends that were beer drinkers. And at the time, I didn't drink beer. We got off the ship and we was walking over towards Beer Garden. And Bill says, Virg, do you have your beer card? And I said, yes, I do, I've got it. And he said, were you going to give it to me this time? And I said, if it's your turn, sure. And Blank said, Bill, it's not your turn. Blank said, it's my turn. And I wasn't sure, I didn't keep track. So they got together face to face. I thought one was going to land a blow, but they were so mad. So I got between them, I spread them apart. And I says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my beer card. And I reached in my pocket and got the card and I brought it out. And I said, I'm going to tear this in two because we're not going to have any more trouble, are we? And they didn't say anything. I'd act like I'm turning. No, wait a minute. Bill says, wait a minute. He says, I think Blank's right. I think it is his turn. Blank says, no, it isn't really. It's, Bill, it's your turn. I said, well, that tells me something. There won't be any more trouble over that beer card, will there? No, there sure won't.
And I remember at the end of the day, he would come on the loudspeaker. They had loudspeakers hanging around in the palm trees. Okay, men, get back aboard your boats. All you guys up in the trees, come down now and get back on your boats.
We thought when we came in, the first time we came into Anchorage, we thought we could just sleep. You know, we didn't think we had to get up. I was laying there sound asleep, I guess. All of a sudden, something hit me in the back. A crew was in there, and they was checking the bunks. Because you're supposed to get up, don't matter if you didn't report where you was, or what you were doing, or what your job was. You're supposed to be out of your bunk room. It was the executive officer of the ship, and his master of arms, and a couple other guys, right? So you know what he did? He put us on report. So now we got to go to captain's mast. And this guy, you know when this guy had captain's mast? He had captain's mast during the typhoon on the hangar deck. There was more water on the hangar deck than there was in the ocean.
Some of the waves were coming up over the flight deck. The flight deck is 65 feet off the water.
The Hornet would roll and almost it feels like was on its side.
A ship as big as a Hornet, when that thing would go down in the water, in that typhoon, it would go down in the water, boom, and the whole rear end, all the screws would come out of the water, and that thing would shake all over. That ship would just shake all over and rattle and make some of the worst noise. They had to take and cancel the captain's mast because they couldn't even stand up.
Bill and Blank and I, we were tired of sitting in the ready room. Said, let's go out and see how bad this typhoon is. So we stepped out of the ready room, got up on the flight deck, and we looked out, and a tin can was by the side of us. There were always tin cans on both sides of us.
The escort ships that was with us during the typhoon, all you could see during that typhoon was the smokestacks.
And we kept watching that. All of a sudden, we see a guy come out a door, grabbed a railing. I don't know what he was doing out there, but a big wave came over. And when the wave broke loose, there was nothing there. The guy was gone. That was standing on the rail. Probably 10 to 15 seconds later, the tin can went down bow first, and we kept waiting for it to come up. Never did come up. We went back in the ready room, and the squawk box sent a message and said we just lost the tin can on the port side. It sunk.
There was 3 ships disappeared. 3 destroyers disappeared in the ship, in the one we were in. That was the worst typhoon they ever had out there that the Navy got involved in.
They used to get the first guy a lot in our dives. Like if you hunt ducks, which duck do you shoot at? You shoot at the first one. And so most of the pilots that we lost were the first guys in the dives.
I just figured, if we ever got shot down, we were always 200 or 300 miles ahead of our own front lines. And if I got into a bad situation where we were going to be captured, that I wasn't going to take a chance on not doing my best. So I had 2 pistols. I had my old 45, and then I had the 38 shoulder holster. So I figured I was going to use both of them as long as I lasted, and rather go out that way than being captured and tortured and beheaded, which they did.
But I'll never forget when we were getting ready to go on that flight. We was in the head. That's the bathroom. I don't know why I wanted to comb my hair, because I'd go put my goggles and hat on and all. And we was in the bathroom, and Steed was one of the guys that was flying with the pilot, with the skipper. And when they called for the manned planes, he started to go out, and I said, "Hey, Steed, let me use your comb." And so he handed me the comb, and he started to walk on out. And I said, "Well, wait a minute." He said, "Give it to me when I get back." I couldn't tell you how many years I carried that comb, because he didn't come back.
We had a flight of 7 planes. Wasn't very long, and I was on my gun looking out, and I saw one of our planes down there, and it got hit. One of the fighters said that Dennison was hit, meaning his plane and crew. The enemy came out and picked him up. I had no idea what happened after that. But an F-6 fighter pilot was shot down a few days later, and he floated down and landed in a tree. He heard voices in the distance. Turned out they were Chinese guerrillas, so they helped him out of the tree, and the fighter pilot saw it looked like they were American boys. The fighter pilot pulled out a dog tag, and he pointed to it, and he pointed to the clearing, and the leader knew he meant to get the dog tags from the 3 guys that were hung in 3 trees. And he came back and said that their tongues had been cut out and some of their fingernails had been pulled off. But they got the dog tags and brought them back and gave them to the leader. And the leader handed them to the fighter pilot. And they turned out to be Dennison's, Falk, and Steed's.
Don't tell it. He's a real good buddy. He's a good gunner, and it was just someone enjoyable to be with. I suppose that they listed him as missing in action.
Oh, that's the day Haley got shot down, the 9th. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
He landed in the water, and we flew over him. There wasn't anything we could do.
And the wind evidently was blowing him ashore, and he was rowing like hell to try to keep out to sea. He didn't want to get blown ashore where the Japanese were.
Very powerful man, rowing as fast as he could.
He had one crewman laying across his raft, seemed to be unconscious.
The onshore wind was so strong that it blew him in, and they were captured.
I can still picture him down there, just rowing those flimsy oars in a life raft. And
we were going on a strike. I'm not sure where we were going, but anyhow, there was a little boat in the water. We were taking turns making runs on it, firing machine guns. Balcom was in a plane ahead of us.
He was a buddy of mine, and He slept right underneath me, and we used to kid each other and get on each other. And he was a heck of a nice guy.
He took a shot, the 50 caliber shot, in the left side of his belly, his waist, and that and went through his belly and opened him up.
And it came up through the bottom of the plane, one bullet.
His gunner jumped down out of the turret when he saw he was hit, and the gunner was holding his insides. He managed to pick up the mic and call the pilot and tell him that Balcom had been hurt bad.
We went and watched them bury him at sea.
And all the guys went down. The officers spoke. The captain spoke.
They got, it was time to pull the lever. When they did, Balcom went down the chute and he rippled these sheets going down. And I don't know why that stuck with me, but I still think about that. That's the main thing I remember about Balcom, how his gunner got down, trying to help him out, keeping his insides in, and he still died. And going down that chute, those white sheets rippling. It was hard to take.
Yeah, I remember that. I always hated to see guys get lost and go down. Because you know something? We were young. We were kids. And you figure they got no life whatsoever. Just had no chance to live, no chance to.
At Ulysses, after coming back from a series of strikes moving closer and closer to Japan, we heard a rumor that we might be relieved and return to Hawaii.
When they came back from the meeting about who was going to be relieved and all, we were sitting up there and we go, hey, we're waving, and they come out and went, and boy, we went, yeah, we was up there sitting on there waiting on that man.
Oh, are you kidding? Whew. You talk about relief. And I said, I believe this is the happiest day of my life. I was glad.
It was a pretty good feeling. We thought, well, we got through this tour. Maybe we'll go home and might be over with by the time we have to come out here again. It was just a happy feeling, really. We don't have to be shot at for a while.
I didn't mind the strikes. There's no question about that, because I felt like I was doing what I could. I felt good about that, contributing. But when I heard that, it made me think, we're going home. We're going back to the USA. We don't have any strikes tomorrow. It was a post-Christmas kind of gift that everyone appreciated. When the Japanese surrendered, I was in San Diego. Suddenly, crowds appeared on the streets, and we got the word, war is over, the Japanese have surrendered. We were then stationed at Santa Rosa, California. That was one big night in Santa Rosa. Everybody was, thankful that it was over with, and there would be no more killing, and everybody could go back to doing what they wanted to do.
I was on a train with his mother going to Naval Air Station Grosse Seal, Michigan. And we got off the train in the morning, and I commented to her what a dirty city this was. There's papers all over the place, and then we saw a headline, Japanese capitulated. And we were on a train sleeping at the end of the war.
Didn't know if I wanted to stay in the Navy. I thought about it, So I had to go to Alameda for an interview. So I borrowed one of the fighter planes, F-6F, and went down, 2 commanders interviewing my lowly ensign. And I wasn't saying sir. And the one commander said, "Can't you say sir?" "Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir." And I made up my mind then, I'm getting the hell out of this outfit. And so when I flew back to Santa Rosa, I flew under the Golden Gate Bridge.
What am I, a young guy, 21, 22 years old, been gone for 4 years, and I'm going to put my name on put another 4 years. And I'd met this wonderful girl named Vi. Man, my choice was I'd rather get Vi in the sack than to get into a cockpit. And so that's about what that was. And I did. 62 years.
You're doing so great. It's such an honor.
Well,
It is.
I'm happy. I'm real happy.
Well, we love you. You're just wonderful. You're our hero.
Oh,
And I can't wait to have more scotch with you. The privilege of documenting their stories of heroism firsthand has been life-changing, and spending time with them has been a second chance at spending time with my late grandfather.